Hello and welcome to Uncomfortable Conversations. I'm your host, Nick Bridwell, and today I'm really excited to introduce you to a friend of mine, Betsy Reed. Betsy is an accomplished speaker, author, and leader on social and environmental issues, and since she was a 10-year-old girl in Wyoming, she's been involved in volunteerism and community organization. For the past 17 years, she's conducted an international career with corporate government clients across the UK, US, Africa, and Asia. Her successes include national campaigns on issues like fair trade, food waste, and packaging. Her most recent accomplishment is last week's release of her book, Communicating Social and Environmental Issues Effectively. So let's say hi to Betsy.
Hello.
Hey, Betsy.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I know that you and I personally have had some really great conversations about sustainability and social issues. So I'm excited to bring that to our audience and let them get to know you a little bit better.
Cool, let's do this. I'm excited too.
So in this episode, I want to do something a little different to help people get to know you. So I'm going to call this little segment job interview questions, although you're not in a job interview. And I think we'll start with maybe two truths and a lie. I like that to get people get to know you. So can you tell us two things that are true about you, one thing that is a lie, and we'll try to see if I can figure out which is which.
Okay. I actually love this game because I just redid my brand, my website and everything to stop being a consultancy brand and to actually just step into being me. And part of the whole reason was being quite a multifaceted person working in a very complex area. So this is going to have nothing to do with my career. Okay, here we go. Okay. How about this? I have been for many years a professional cellist. I have lived in 7 countries, and I once finished a college soccer season, the last 3 games on a broken foot.
I'm going to go with, I think that the lie might be cello. Let's see if I'm right.
No, I've only lived in 5 countries.
Oh, you got me.
So yeah, I started playing in my state symphony orchestra at the age of 16, and I earned a decent living playing for a lot of weddings all the way through university as part of a string quartet. And yeah, then moved to Scotland to do a master's degree and kind of had to leave my cello behind, which was tragic. But yeah, professional musician.
Yeah, I can imagine carting that across Europe is a little bit of a hassle.
Yeah. I could like buy another seat for it on the airplane, and I was just a poor student at the time, so I couldn't wrangle that. So yeah, yep, cool. Good.
Yeah, that's pretty intense.
Question. I like that.
Well, thank you. And so then we got to know you a little bit. Now we can roll into the drill sergeant questions here. No, I'm just kidding. We're gonna have fun. But yeah. I think first off, I want to chat about your book, Communicating Social and Environmental Issues Effectively. Can you just tell us kind of like how this came about and why you wrote it, what the book's about?
It was, well, I was asked to write it, which now I know when you get asked to write a book, you say yes. Because I have enough friends who are writers, and that whole pitching to publishers and stuff thing is not fun. So I'd always thought I probably had a book in me. And then somebody came and asked me to write this book because I have spent my entire career, as you already said in my bio, working in social and environmental issues. And I don't consider myself a comms person, but I have done some roles in comms for communications agencies. I've been the head of communications at an NGO and stuff. But I got really frustrated as I saw social and environmental issues becoming much more mainstream by seeing communications professionals and leaders whom they wrote for, they briefed, just starting to mess it up on the reg. So I was like, you know what? I want to train people. I want to intervene. I want to make sure people understand the risks associated with this. And I also want to make sure that the world is hearing the truth about these things, because now people expect a lot more of brands and governments on social and environmental issues. And my career is almost entirely British. So that's a real hotbed of consumer activism. And it meant that it started to be lucrative and more mainstream. And so, I would see people who didn't really know what they were doing with these issues saying yes to a brief because it made them money, but then doing it badly or inauthentically or even making things up. And I was just like, that isn't right. So my sort of justice campaigner side came out. So I started doing trainings kind of on my own, but then I got hired as a trainer for the PR Communications Association in the UK, which is the biggest PR association in Europe, and doing these workshops for them. And so based on that, I was sort of out there in the world, and a publisher saw that and approached me because they saw that this was a gap in their portfolio. What was interesting is what I've grappled with until very recently, and I like to think this is not going to happen anymore because of what's going on in the world. Sustainability, which is social and environmental issues, was treated as a real niche issue. And therefore there was like the sustainability team or the sustainability comms people or the people who were just really interested in it. And then everything else, like the business to be done, the money making stuff. And so quite often the first budget to get trimmed was sustainability people. So this publisher then turned around and they were like, well, our publishing board thinks this is a bit too niche. And I was like, thank you for proving my point. So I decided to just throw it out there to the universe. And I was at the PR Fest in Edinburgh, which is a big festival for PR people and learning and stuff, the very next day. And my friends from the PRCA were there and they were like, well, we're publishing a practice guide series. Why don't we publish your book as part of that series? So it was just perfect. So then along came their publisher, which is Emerald Publishing, which is this really great little publisher in the north of England who published some great stuff. And sort of fast forward through the process to now. And I truly believe that timing is always perfect. So that first happened 2.5 years ago. I was asked to write this book. And by the time it came out this July, 2020, the world has changed significantly. So even in the writing of it, by the time I'd finished and submitted my draft in January of 2020, I could talk about things like climate crisis. I didn't kind of have to pussyfoot around, oh, you might not believe in this. By now, it's just like I can actually write this confidently with the facts that are out there in the world and the mainstreaming of these issues and just be like, here you go. Here's a really practical framework for leaders and communications professionals to use to communicate these issues effectively. And actually, the advice I got, writing it was a really great process for me. The advice I got from someone I really came to respect, who's a professor. I'm in Barcelona today, by the way. I live in Barcelona. The professor at business school here said, write this book so you can write the next book. And so I really took that to heart, and it really made this book a lot more alive and a lot more relevant actually for now, not knowing at the time what was going to happen in 2020. And that was to weave in this idea that in order to be great communicators and great leaders, we also need to be able to be human in our work. And that means bringing our instincts and our values into it. And we'll probably get to that, I imagine, more in this interview.
Mm-hmm.
But so I wove that into this book because I really think there's a future book out there, but also there's value in this book about the idea of don't just shut off your instincts. Don't just shut off when something doesn't feel right. Don't just go ahead and deliver that comms brief anyway. Be like, I'm probably creating risk. If this doesn't feel right, we're not actually doing it, I'm following this comms framework. When I get to that step at the end, which is about risk assessment and, do a pre-mortem, which is like, write as if things have gone wrong. What happened? That they've already brought themselves to their work enough as humans who are connected to everything and live in this ecosystem that we have to survive in. And that changes how they communicate things. So that was the long version.
Awesome. Well, I know I've perused and I can't wait to get more into reading the entire book and instituting that in my, in this business and then at Uncomfortable Conversations, and also bring it up to my day job as at an agency. So it's really exciting.
Yeah.
The one thing I want to talk about is just the concept of sustainability on a kind of bird's eye level, really. And then we can deep dive. But I know sustainability gets thrown around a lot. Can you help people understand the true concept of sustainability in its purest form and how to be most effective with sustainability?
This is a question I love because it's also one of my bugbears, and that's why the title of my book isn't Communicating Sustainability Effectively, it's Communicating Social and Environmental Issues Effectively. So there is this, I won't give the exact definition, but it's called the Brundtland definition. There was a Brundtland Commission in the early 80s that came up with this sort of standard definition of sustainability, which is basically about not using more resources now than we can sustain in the future. So not outpacing ourselves. And that means human and environmental. So one of the things that is often misunderstood, and I hear this a lot, which is why I use the term social and environmental issues throughout the book and in my work is that people associate sustainability just with environmental issues. And frankly, the reason I work in these issues is because I care about the survival of humankind. I care about social justice. I care about people and not putting other people in discomfort because I want to buy a cheap t-shirt. And in order to survive as humans, we need trees and plants, and we want to avoid ecosystem collapse, which is this large thing looming on the horizon that unfortunately a lot of people aren't seeing coming. So the definition, the macro definition would be sustainability is about not overdoing our use of social and environmental resources so that we actually stand a chance of surviving in the future. That's the macro.
So when we're talking about sustainability, or whether we're talking about kind of social and environmental justice, what do you think constitutes productive sustainability or productive, justice?
Like how
and what are the
right?
What are some imposters that you've seen out there? Like what should we look to in our time to be most effective protecting this world and moving forward?
That is a really easy question to answer. No, that is a huge question. Well, I come at this as a campaigner. And so my perspective on things tends to be very positive, very proactive, and very personal. So my job is often about putting this in language that people can then feel encouraged by and not be overwhelmed by just the bigness of these issues of like climate change, ocean plastics, what do we do about this? Like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all these huge, huge issues that are embedded in the systems in which we live. So I'd say on a personal basis, on a practical basis, accepting that individuals, governments, and organizations are going to get it wrong sometimes, and that those who are striving to do better in terms of staying within the resources that are actually sustainable, natural resources, human resources. I don't like to refer to humans as resources, but they treat the people who work for them well. They treat the people who are in their supply chains well, meaning the farmers who grow cotton and the people who make that cotton into fabric and then stitch it into a t-shirt. So then by the time it reaches us in the very, frankly, privileged West, we're in a great position to influence this. We are not exploiting people just to maintain our lifestyles. So I would say the first step for anyone is start to think about things, start to research things, start to wonder why things are cheap when things are cheap, rather than just being like, I got this whole bag of stuff for only $5. Be like, why was it $5? Who did it cost to be cheap for me? And I think that's a real perspective shift. And it's uncomfortable. That is a really uncomfortable perspective to gain, but once you gain it, you can't go back. So that, I think, affects everybody at all levels, government on down to corporations, to businesses who sell things, to people who buy things. So I think that was my inclusive of everyone answer. And yeah, there are definitely imposters out there, but I also want to, I know we've talked in the past a lot about not punching your allies. So to focus on the people who are trying to do something and keeping them accountable to do better. For example, when a brand says they're doing something about Black Lives Matter, looking into how they treat employees who are whistleblowers. And I know there's some brands who've really gotten stung on that lately, as they should. But also recognizing when people are genuinely trying to do well, and then being able to shine the spotlight and call people out when they're trying to say they're doing something that they're not. So some useful terms that people might know or might not know that are pretty common by now is greenwashing. So it's like whitewashing. Greenwashing is when you're saying you're doing something that you absolutely are not. And often that is down to communications people putting messages out there that are complicit with some cover up or just overstating things. And it can often be a really good story. A great marketing person can sort of, pardon the expression, polish a turd, sort of not doing that. And then there are other terms that have sort of come up more lately, which is like purpose wash, because purpose is a big thing now. And
that's celebrated a lot of times, right? If you could pull this off, you see, who's our hero of the 2000s? It's Don Draper. It's somebody who can take a turd and put some perfume on it and make people put it in a bottle. So we don't want that.
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, I think savvy leaders understand, and communications people understand that actually the world has changed so much. We've got people are not dumb, people are more activist, and also there's social media and the 24-hour news cycle. So there is a higher likelihood that things are going to come to light if you're covering it up, or if you're just washing it over. So greenwash, purpose wash, and impact wash is one that I actually just learned a couple weeks ago, which is, you know, people claiming to have impact that they're clearly not having, or claiming impact that isn't theirs, so that they can just get on with doing the things that have worked for them for the past maybe 200 or 50 years or whatever, and not actually looking at how they need to do things differently in light of what we now know about the resources available to us, the challenges facing us as humankind. Yeah, so I think that's where, I'm not going to name names, I don't want to get sued, but I don't like calling people out. I will call people out quietly if I'm in their boardroom with them, but I exist within an ecosystem where my role is to have those quiet advisor conversations. And there's absolutely a need for people on the outside naming names and calling people out and shaming them, but that's not me.
I think on the flip side, maybe talking about some of the good that some companies have done is awesome. What do you think about maybe something like the NBA and the WNBA? I don't know if you follow that because you're in Barcelona right now, but you see the difference in them. They're taking it like an issue like Black Lives Matter and putting their money where their mouth is. And, you know, they go out, they walk out of the national anthem. They do things where they think that they can be most effective. And that leads to a question. I'm jumping a little on our ideas that we had, but I like to talk about going into what you're saying about allies. We had a conversation the other day personally, and I was talking about the Zac Efron show, and saying, you know, it was very macro level, but it was a great entry point, because what happens is Zac Efron goes in there and he's like, oh my God, these bees are amazing. He's not talking about the scientific aspect of things. And I don't know if I was a little snobby about it or what, but the point being is that not everybody can know everything. And we need people who are okay saying, hey, I could be shooting a movie, but instead I'm doing this series, putting my heart into it, traveling the world. And that's just one example maybe, right, of an ally that you can say it's not someone you expected, but it's someone who's doing some great work.
Well, it's like that. Remember that last Chelsea Handler special on Netflix, which was about, basically, it was interesting to me as somebody who's worked a lot in racial justice issues and kind of had to grapple with that whole like, oh wow, I'm white, what does that mean thing, you know, a couple decades ago. But at the same time, I remember being in the place of watching her on that show, progressively realizing she was white, and sort of having had a lot of my friends and family in that position lately with Black Lives Matter really going big. And just thinking, you know what? People like that are allies. If they are helping to deliver a message that people need to hear, and they're delivering it in a way that we wouldn't necessarily say, but if we're saying it the way we need to hear it, we're only going to reach the people like us. So we need a whole chorus of people out there saying it their way and out there saying it to their people, because otherwise we just become niche, and then we don't really, we stifle our own impact. So yeah, I'm big on stop punching your allies. Stop picking on the people who are actually trying to move the same direction, but they're going to do it differently than you. Like, why do we own the moral high ground? Why do we own the messaging? If we're moving in the same direction, we're moving in the same direction. We're still on the same side. So what I would challenge people to do is stop calling out the people who are actually your teammates, and start looking for the people who are doing nothing, or the people who still need to hear it maybe differently, and recruit more allies. I think that's much more productive and much more impactful.
And there are ways to kind of have a sliding scale on that, you know, like if a company's putting some efforts into sustainability, then don't kick them in the ass. But maybe on a social issue, if they're saying we love Black Lives Matter, but then you look at their boardroom and it's all a bunch of white dudes, you might be thinking about that, like, oh, well, are they really moving the envelope, or is this a PR stunt? And so maybe it's just a personal, you know, you have to look at yourself and say ask how is this impacting, or how are these organizations doing the right thing? Do a little research. Yeah,
and it calls time on that very binary idea that there's a perfect, that we're going to arrive and then we'll be like, job done, utopia, here we are. It's also, it allows people to be in different places. And because I've run a lot of campaigns, like big national public campaigns in places like the UK, and also, you know, being a community organizer in the US when I was much younger. And I do a lot of behavior change work. So my philosophy, and also just based on behavioral psychology, is you have to start where people are. And you can't just demand that they leap over to your side of the river without any stepping stones. And yeah, I think that that's something that we tend to, as progressives, to use the American terminology, we tend to get wrong. We want to punch people for not being like us. And actually, it's the beauty of the world is that people aren't like us. And this is why you have these conversations, you know, being able to engage with people who are very different in a really respectful way that, you know, just is like, you're just in a different place and you might never get to the same place as me, but I hope we can be pointing in the same direction. Or maybe a conversation with you in which I deeply disagree with you or even offended helps me to sharpen my understanding of my stance or my argument or my way of reaching other people. So I think all of these things are useful, and all we can all do is grapple with these very complex issues and do our best. And we're gonna kind of mess it up from time to time. But yeah, just try to maybe have a lens that maybe some people really are trying to do their best, and that might be being someone ignorant at the start or whatever. But I just take all of that as valuable.
Yeah, and there's so much, I guess, better use of your time in this day and age than ripping at people who aren't doing the exact right thing that you think, when you could be lifting up people who are, or who are doing as much as they can. And then what you're saying about just meeting people where they are, it reminds me of a friend of mine who is a very good debater. And he always says, you know, I don't even agree with some people sometimes. Sometimes I argue the point that the other person usually would, just so when they're arguing back to me, I'm thinking, oh, these are things I can learn the next time I have this argument. It's a little devil's advocate, you know?
I lived in Scotland for many years, and debate is like the national sport there. And I remember I would come home, I had a Scottish partner for many years, and I'd be like, why are you arguing with me? I know you agree with me. And he would be like, good for you. But it's true, it is good for you. You don't want to live with that, but it's nice to have somebody playing the devil's advocate in your circle, and also being comfortable with that, because I'm just going to say it. I haven't lived in the US for a while. I left as a graduate student to do my master's degree somewhere else, and lived in the UK for many years and established my career there. And something that I know we agree is lacking in American public discourse in particular, and in a lot of other places, is this space to disagree and actually have a debate that isn't really personal really quickly. And that's the value of conversations like this and this podcast. Because how do you ever change your views? Which sometimes you have to, if you aren't bumping up against opposing ones, you know? So I think this is incredibly valuable for the growth of our society and culture, and getting past some of these big crunchy issues we're dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, it can be so hard. You get into these identity politics and everything, and then you see this in America right now. It's really hard. I mean, just families, friends, you end up distancing yourself because it's hard to get to that common ground when you see a lot of people worshiping Donald Trump as some messiah, when it's very hard just for me personally. And that's something we've talked about on the show. And so trying to meet people on common ground is a piece of advice I'm going to take. And I hope that that's something that our listeners can work with. Just don't get fired up too early. Try to get to third, fourth tier of the conversation, you know. And I
listen, because it's so, okay, I'm going to behavior change you. Sort of understanding the psychology of humans is the limbic and the cortex. So just to break that down, limbic system is like our lizard brain. It's the thing that keeps us breathing and the way that we just initially react to everything. And that's how every single human being reacts initially, is emotion and instinctive. But then as we perhaps get more practiced at it, or you know, that can come from being more educated or whatever, more practiced at it, we then kick into our cortex, which is where we rationalize things and sometimes talk ourselves out of that gut instinct or that emotive argument. And so if you start with emotion and you stay in emotion, you kind of never get into that more rational side of things. But at the same time, you can't expect everybody to get there. So sometimes you actually need to be quite emotive but positive. And that's something that I've learned a lot about in creating messaging and testing it, and just seeing what lands with people who think very differently from me and live very differently from me, when I'm just trying to get them to maybe recycle more or waste less food because it saves them money. Just feel like it saves you money. And they're like, okay, cool. We don't have to talk about save the earth, you know, methane emissions from landfill because you're throwing away a third of your groceries that you buy. You're just like, you're throwing away a third of your groceries you buy. Did you know that That's like $30 a month. And they're like, wow, that's a lot. Okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. So sort of just that kind of stuff, and just understanding that we don't always have to engage in debate. Sometimes just give somebody a killer fact that you know will work for them. And it's like, like refuse to be emotional about it. It's a thought.
That's a good thought, and it's one that I think I'll move forward with. It's what I think what we have a real problem with right now in America is that there's a lot of disinformation going on
everywhere
on purpose.
America, yeah.
And so you get to the point where you want to have a factual argument, and people don't believe facts anymore. And so that's the hardest part for me is getting to that spot where you go, here is evidence A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W. And they're like, I don't really dig any of that. It's from the Washington Post. You're like, crap. So, just moving forward past that, I guess, too.
Yeah, it's sort of that idea that you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. But then people are like, nuh-uh, I have my own facts. And Facebook, and you know that, but they're totally legit in their minds. Yeah, I think that's why I think debate isn't necessarily the way forward. Like engaging in debate is just, you're not necessarily standing in a very safe place, because it often is just linked to emotion, and people are going to go with the facts that feed the emotion. So it's back to that limbic cortex thing. They're not acting in their cortex. They're just like, ooh, I like the emotion of that. And then they rationalize it and make it fact. So I actually think this is where I think I feel very, very happy with my behavior change work and background, because I am going to ask people what works for them. What would actually appeal to you? What would be the message that actually works for you? And that's the one I'm going to use. I'm not going to debate them on it and be like, no, you really need to believe me for these reasons. Just be like, well, what would make you believe that? And then they'll tell you. Quite often. They'll usually tell you they hate something. So you have to take ego out of it. Honestly, I think in order to be truly effective as a campaigner, as somebody trying to sometimes change people's minds, you have to be willing to set your ego aside and be like, I am not going to try to convince you with my way of saying it and what I think. I'm going to listen, and then I'm going to adapt so that I'm giving you what you need to get to where I need you to be. And I think that maybe is quite a different perspective. And it's hard for me to see this anymore, because this is how I have worked for the past 15 years. It's what I've been trained to do. But it's really effective. Like, I want a couple.
It's super valuable for us. Super valuable, because we think about having an uncomfortable conversation, and that's the message that we want to spread. And that is the uncomfortable conversation, is getting past the ego, being able to sit down with somebody and talk to people. And a lot of times it's the subject matter itself that's uncomfortable. We've had those conversations. And then a lot of the times it's the relationship that's uncomfortable. But either way, I feel like this is something that you are a huge proponent of. And it's something that I believe in too, that discomfort is so important to progressing as a human being and as a species. Can you talk, it's not something that we prepared, but can you talk a little bit about your love of discomfort?
Yeah. Oh, my role as a professional discomforter. Yeah, I had a feeling this was going to go into that area of being more of an uncomfortable conversation to activists. This is my message of, stop punching your allies, and don't think that actually arguing with people is going to get you anywhere, because you're just firing up their limbic system, and you're just doing death battle as lizard brains, like, yeah, I think this is actually becoming a message about like being uncomfortable as maybe an activist or somebody who's a progressive, or, I would love to be able to say this to people who are disagreeing with me in my sort of lefty politics, because in order to get to a collective place of survival, it's sort of like, doesn't matter what I think, doesn't matter what you think. We need to all be willing to be uncomfortable with ourselves and be like, maybe I am wrong, but how can we find a way forward together? So yeah, down to professional discomfort. So obviously what I do in my career is I work as a sustainability advisor, social environmental stuff. And I say really hard things sometimes to C-suite, executives of corporates. I've done a lot of lobbying in the UK and just challenging laws and regulations and ways of being, but usually based on like, this is going to get you in trouble, which is just it's a killer argument, because nobody wants to like get legally in trouble, get in trouble on social media. But so I make people uncomfortable on purpose so that then they're ready to hear solutions that I might help them co-create. So whether it's like a packaging strategy of a food company who have had Greenpeace climbing on their fishing boats, or I used to work for Nestle. It's been an interesting year working for Nestle, working on their public engagement work around sustainability and, having a real dialogue with Greenpeace about palm oil and stuff like that. But I made people at Nestle uncomfortable. Like I was totally like, hey, Greenpeace, I know you guys. But making people internally a bit uncomfortable because that was where they needed to be. So what I say now, and also I'm a yoga teacher, is that discomfort is the edge of your comfort zone. And actually sitting in that and challenging it and finding ways to just get more comfortable in that place is actually an expansion of your comfort zone. It's a superpower. It's an expansion of your life, your ability to operate or live or be as a human. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of don't shy away from discomfort or uncomfortable conversations, because actually, if you can be with that discomfort, you are practicing something valuable and you are moving in a direction that expands you. So yeah, I'm a proponent of discomfort. I now am quite a fan of it. So actually, I think that's going to be the focus of my podcast. I've just decided. We had a chat about this a couple of days ago, but it is about discomfort, the science of it, the value of it, people who've practiced it and had it be really world-changing for them and maybe their business, people who are really pushy about it, people who are insiders and use it internally to create change. So there's a whole range of ways in which discomfort can be valuable. And I think right now, dialogues like we're having in society all over the world about Black Lives Matter, pandemics, social behavior in light of these things they're uncomfortable, and there's value in that. Because if we just step away from it back into our comfort zone, we're living the way we've always lived, and it clearly isn't working.
That's so true. I think of I've been picturing basically discomfort and being uncomfortable is just a manifestation of fear in a lot of ways. Do you think that's true?
Interesting question, actually. I think discomfort can trigger fear. Like, it is uncomfortable to be in fear, of course, but I think it's the other way around for me. We are literally hardwired to resist change. Like, that's how we've survived. We sort of adapt, but we try to keep things simple and the same around us. Like, that is just basically wired into our system as humans and our brains. So of course it's going to be uncomfortable, but that's literally the way our brains are wired. So we're constantly changing, we're constantly adapting, we're constantly renewing our cells and creating new neural pathways in our brain. So change is not beyond anyone. And like I say, discomfort is the edge of change. Nobody changes in an easy chair. You change because you go out and train, you run, or you take a course, or you have uncomfortable conversations, and that is literally rewiring your brain. So what you find is the more you engage in discomfort, the less things that were previously uncomfortable are uncomfortable. So yeah, it's expensive. And I would say, wow, how would you not want second helping of that? How would you not want to do that as something you do 3 times a week or something? Like, it's when people are training for triathlons, that's what they're doing. When people are getting their master's degree, that is what they're doing. So having uncomfortable conversations is exactly the same thing in my view.
It's interesting because you're also a yoga teacher, and that is a physical manifestation of that in a lot of ways. I know personally, when I've done yoga, you have to push through some discomfort sometimes to get to places where all of a sudden it opens you up in a new way. And that's interesting that you have that kind of correlation in 2 different areas of your life.
Yeah, and I've really integrated them. And actually, this is something, so in Barcelona, our lockdown was quite intense. It was 3 months of literally being in my house in the city center and only leaving like once a week to go buy groceries. So that brought a lot of stillness, a lot of being on my own, a lot of stripping away of things I didn't even realize I used to distract myself, and bloody hell, discomfort. So that really brought me to a place of integrating these 2 sides of being a professional discomforter in my sustainability work, but also the kind of yoga I teach and the kind of meditation I teach is it's yin yoga. So it's about holding poses for a long time. So it's very passive, and it gets you into like deep connective tissue, and it's super uncomfortable, and it's mentally quite challenging because you just sit in there in discomfort. for like, you don't know how long. So I brought those two things together and realized they really are two sides of the same coin. In order to change and do the exciting, innovative things as humans that then change our systems and our society and our planet, we have to start with being willing to practice personal discomfort. So, I mean, like, I would say to anybody who has a sports practice or, you know, is a runner, it is that place where you kind of get past the discomfort into your runner's high. That's exactly what it is. And that's exactly what we should see these uncomfortable conversations as being, is it's exciting. And some days we're going to need to like back off and take a break and take care of ourselves, but be willing and disciplined enough to come back to the uncomfortable conversations. And now I'm going to say something uncomfortable. As a white person who's worked a lot on racial issues and stuff, it is about recognizing that it's a real privilege to retire from discomfort. It's a privilege to be able to back away from uncomfortable conversations and not have them, because that means you don't have to have them. Whereas people who live in chronic discomfort, people who are living in poverty, or, you know, they make $1 a day working in a factory in Bangladesh, or they are coffee farmers in Kenya and they made no money this year because the coffee market fell apart, and we don't see that. So we don't have to have that conversation, but it's their lives. They have to have that conversation, and yet we're not engaging in it. So we're shutting that down in privilege. So I think it's about being like, some days I need a break. Some days I just need to take a nap. Some days I'm feeling really angry and I just need to like back away from the social justice, the environmental justice stuff. But we have to come back to it. And that's uncomfortable, because I have to recognize my own privilege to do that and be like, I have the privilege of stepping away, and now it is my obligation to humankind to come back. So yeah,
it feels like it's with that privilege it becomes the honor, and it's almost like an obligation that we should have, maybe, to step forward, like you said, because a lot of people in this world don't have a mouthpiece. And so if we can use our privilege to give people a space to talk and to share their stories, then maybe that's the greatest thing we can do as journalists, and, you know, as authors, trying to find those voices. So I know if anybody's listening to the episode right now and you have people that have a story that you think is worth telling, we'd definitely love to hear it. There are a lot of things going on in this world with the climate crisis, island nations being so affected, and we can go into extreme detail about that and take an entire other episode just talking about the climate in general.
Yeah. Well, and it's sort of recognizing that you can still be privileged and be uncomfortable yourself. You know, it doesn't mean that you don't have your own challenges, and I know that you've talked about that a lot.
Right. Yeah.
It's definitely out there, but it also takes a bit of like stepping outside yourself and being like, I'm connected to everyone and everything. So yeah, stuff isn't always easy in my life, or stuff hasn't been easier. I've had some major challenges, you know, no matter who you are, but recognizing that most of us in the West have some level of privilege, some level, you know, just sort of like if you've traveled a lot or if you've paid attention much to, I mean, like I remember traveling around Malawi a few years ago, which is in the heart of Africa. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, if not the poorest country in the world per capita. And just seeing what that actually looks like, of people who literally can't be farmers because they don't have land. So all they can do is gather grass, weave baskets, sit under a tree and hope somebody comes by and buys their baskets so they can feed their children that week. And just the levels of privilege are many, and stepping out of ourselves yet again. And I know that that's pretty rich coming from me as a very privileged white person who has been able to get an education and had access to things like student loans, which in themselves are a privilege. And I have 2 very useful passports, which I'm like, well, I earned one, but I got to earn one, you know? So I tread carefully here, and there are going to be things that I get wrong, and I acknowledge that, and nobody has to forgive me for that, because I am kind of up there on the food chain. But I hope that I can use this privilege that I have to open the door for other people, to help that bell curve of progress to stretch and then come forward, to stretch and then come forward. So yeah, that is my passion, and that's always my intention in any of this stuff that I say, is to encourage people, to make people uncomfortable, but to also open up a way forward. I never want to block people. I never want people to get stuck because of things that I say. So if anybody ever does want to talk about any of this stuff that we've said, I would love, I know you would love to hear from them, because that's the way that we move through these things. That's the way that we expand our comfort zone. And that's the way that we make progress as humanity. And that's actually really important to our collective survival at this point.
Yeah, it's one of the great things about doing something like a podcast or a video series where you can connect with different people that you wouldn't have otherwise. We can't exactly pick up our phones and call Anderson Cooper, but you can always, we'll leave our contact information in the boxes if anybody wants to reach out to us and have these conversations. Another thing I wanted to talk about is some of the basic principles that you found that have allowed you to proceed with your mission. I think that you've shared 3 of them with me before. I'm kind of really interested to hear about. I think our audience would too.
Oh, well, which 3? Because I'm like, oh.
I wrote down integrity, being human, and connection as 3 pillars of kind of your
those are definitely pillars.
Philosophy.
And then I have like day to day, how do I get out of bed every day? Sometimes don't read these. I have, this is an admission I'm still uncomfortable with, because I'm obviously like, I'm a public affairs person. I'm in advocacy, I'm in policy. I stopped really reading the news in early 2018 when I realized I would reach for my phone every morning, I would read the news, and at a certain point, I just didn't want to get out of bed anymore. And then I realized that was not useful for me or what I feel is my mission in this world. I was paralyzing myself by feeding myself doom every morning, basically. Mm-hmm. So the news is never good. That's not how it works. They're not going to report the good stuff. That's not exciting. It doesn't sell paper. It doesn't trigger our fear that makes us consume it. So stop reading the news. Take breaks when you need to. And again, come back. So that is part of the discomfort thing of like, you know what? Sometimes there's a discomfort that is, you're creating stress for yourself that is actually creating paralysis. So you're living in, adrenal fatigue or stress, or you're constantly in adrenaline. That's not useful. So know how to preserve your own energy. And everyone has a mission in life. And you can figure out what that is and just sit with it a bit, or get help, have a mindfulness practice, or get a coach, or join an online network that is about figuring out your purpose. There's so much stuff out there now. So I think that for me is like, be really clear on what your purpose is. And you don't have to be totally clear. Just know that you have a purpose and you're going to figure it out eventually. So that's a guiding principle. So then when you feel like, what's the point, or I'm exhausted, you have that as your anchor. But back to the 3 things you mentioned that we talked about previously about, integrity, connection, being human. And all of this made its way into my book and kind of how I live and how I teach and what I speak about, which is, knowing what your purpose is, knowing what your values are, means you need to start being clear on when you're not living according to those, because then you're out of integrity. And it's like having an energetic leak. It's like having a hole in one of your tires. It's really hard to steer your car. It's not very fuel efficient. Like all those analogies. If you're not living in your own integrity, it's going to kind of drain you as a human being, because you are a human being. Everybody's a human being. We're not robots. And also just connection, recognizing that we all exist within an ecosystem, and take or leave that word, but we live within a system in which we're connected to other people and the energy around us, whether it's the news or our neighbors or our family or deeper issues that we're paying attention to, like social justice issues, like environmental issues, that we need each other. And that, like I said before, I care about the environment and trees because I need them to breathe. I care about deforestation because we kind of need those things to help the food chain survive that we need. So just recognizing connection and living as if you are connected is something that really guides me, and that's very present with me every day. And that's not been always, that's been something that I've taken years to develop, and it's become more integrated into who I am. And then the being human thing is, like I said, we're not robots. We are human, and bring that to your work. Because I had a boss early in my career who would say to everyone who worked for him, check your personal life at the door. And now I think we've come to a place, especially with this pandemic and working remotely, of recognizing that our lives are inextricably linked to our work. It's not like you have one bubble on another. So be human in everything you do. Be yourself. That is your gift to the world. The world would not be the same without your personality and your passions and your values. And you are important. No matter who you do or what you're doing, you are important. You're here for a reason. And remember, back to, you're connected to everyone and everything. And whether or not we're conscious of that, we are. And just, yeah, living in integrity with that. So probably that got tied up into a nice tidy little bow at the end. But that's where I'm coming from. That's what steers me, and that's what keeps me going. And I love what I do. Absolutely love what I do.
So what is next for Betsy Reed? What are you excited about doing next?
Well, I've just launched my new website. I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes. And I'm excited about that because it does put forward the things that I really feel like I'm here to do and like I'm good at. So sometimes listen to what you're good at, because it's probably what you're here to do. So more speaking, more writing. I think I've got a couple more books in me that I can see, and I'm launching a podcast in September, which you will definitely be part of. And also, like I said, integrating my mindfulness stuff into the professional offer that I have. So I've got on my website actually is an antidote to burnout series. It's a very short meditations that you can do anywhere, at your desk or in a toilet cubicle or wherever, just to like take a breath or be present or connect. So more of that in the world. And I just feel like there's more coming. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but I have wanted for years to produce a TV show, so that might happen at some point in the next years. Yeah, and just enjoying the fact that the world is allowing people like me to work from anywhere and be where I need to be and produce content and encourage businesses and government and people to live a life of integrity that is connected and that is human. But yeah, I think I might have, there might be a move in my future when the world is moving around again. I just feel a real pull to a particular Latin American country. I still need to like date some other countries first before I settle on that one, but I just feel the pull. So we'll see where I end up. Might be in a closer time zone to you.
Awesome. Yeah, right now it's fun. We get to speak early mornings or late evenings because we're 7 years apart. Uncomfortable Conversations being here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and Betsy being in Barcelona. And it's actually, we were really lucky today because the bells have been very, very light. It's fun sometimes. She lives right next to a cathedral, so you get to hear the bells a lot.
Yeah. It was like, where do you live? 1792? Yeah. So the European life, and also it is hot. It's August in Barcelona and nobody here has AC. So I'm sitting next to a window and I'm just trying not to look too sweaty. So forgive me for shyness here.
You're doing great. And thank you so much for coming in here today and talking to us about kind of the discomfort that aligns itself, the intersection of discomfort and, environmental and social issues. I know we're really excited to work together on more projects, and I just really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. And I guess the message that I would want people to get from this, but also about the work that you do, is like, don't get bogged down in discomfort being uncomfortable. Get excited about discomfort. It's the edge of change, and it's a beautiful place to be. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I would love to hear from your listeners if they want to discuss any of this stuff further, because it's fascinating stuff.
Well, that's awesome. We'll see you next time, Betsy.
Thank you so much, Nick. Take care.
Bye. Hi, I'm Nick Bridwell, the creative director of Uncomfortable Conversations. If you were impacted by this video and you think others could benefit from it, then we just ask that you please like and subscribe to our channel. That way we can bring you more content. Thank you so much for coming back to us, and we wish you the best.